Hello, everyone. Thanks for giving this a listen. My name is Nazir. I'm currently a PhD student in physics, and I'm starting this podcast because, well, it's fun. A lot of these topics, like AI and biotech, have been side interests of mine for a long time, and also, I believe a lot of these things are under-discussed, for lack of a better word. I think it's because of a sort of lack of situational awareness of what's happening in the world. I often feel this disconnect when I talk to other people. Like, I'll talk to other people my age, I'm 25, and I find that they think they're going to live to like age 75 or something, retire at 65 after working some job that we commonly see around us today, and that they'll live a very typical life, where everything looks largely the way it does now, and that's just not going to happen. I mean, we can't know for certain, but all evidence suggests that the coming decades will not really be anything like the previous ones. So I thought I'd help to signal boost these things because we live in an incredibly special time where really drastic changes are right around the corner. And I think it's important as well as exciting and entertaining to think about these things. My first guest is a good friend of mine, Zach Furman. Zach is currently doing a PhD in singular learning theory at the University of Melbourne. That's a subset of the science of deep learning. He's also had software engineering experience at various companies such as Tesla and Aurora, and I consider him to be the most well-informed person that I personally know when it comes to AI. I've joked that he's like a walking archive database because it seems like he has read every single paper and just knows everything. And before we begin, just a couple notes on this first episode. First of all, it was recorded on February 6th, so some time has passed, and maybe some parts of it aren't quite as newsworthy as they were when we recorded, but that's totally fine. Secondly, I'm figuring this stuff out as I go along. So there are, for example, some audio issues with some of the first few episodes. Some parts are better than others. For this one, the first 3.5 minutes are kind of hard to understand, but then it gets better, so hang in there. And lastly, the episodes tend to get quite technical, so if you don't have much technical knowledge of the subject and find yourself confused, try skipping to other parts because there are usually more accessible topics covered, like societal implications as well. Now, without further ado, please welcome Zach Furman. Alright, so thanks for coming on, Zach. How are you doing during these end of times?
Yeah, that's right. I'm managing. Yeah.
Yeah, people will be hearing this after that super hype intro jingle that you weren't a fan of.
Oh, right.
So, what is your P-doom? And for people who aren't familiar with the lingo, that means like probability of doom or the chances that you think AI will lead to human extinction.
Yeah, I guess it's a good question. I guess it varies, especially when we're talking about like what constitutes doom, whether that's like literally everyone dies or like we're just like collectively disempowered and like can't affect the future or something like that. I guess maybe a good ballpark would be like 40-50%.
Is that for like extinction or for any negative outcome in general?
Yeah. Well, I think for extinction or maybe extinction or like complete. I'll say extinction. Yeah, like 40% for. Yeah, I think worse that of.
And if your estimate turns out to be like pretty off, what would be the most likely reason for that?
Yeah, I mean, I think really the hardest to predict thing. I guess there's two main ways. One is that this technology just takes quite a lot longer to come than we think it does, and I think by the day that's becoming increasingly unlikely, but still possible that there's some like technical barriers left. I think increasingly the biggest reason might be social reasons or political reasons that for whatever reason we don't deploy AI, we coordinate to regulate smarter than human intelligence, or there's a ton of like different like social dynamics that might result in us not deploying it. And then I think there's still some hope that if we do end up deploying it, maybe there's still some hope that things are somewhat aligned by default and that the like equilibrium outcome still works out to be good for humans. So that seems unlikely to me. So I think the most likely way that we're safe is that it doesn't happen in the first place. But
what should the government be doing about AI risk, do you think?
Yeah, that's a good question. I guess
if you had it your way, would you just pause everything right now? Like, what policies would you implement?
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's a difference between like the world where like I'm a dictator and I just sort of say what I think the best policy is and what's like actually realistic to advocate for. I think if I say like actually what I think the best policy is, I think it is maybe not a complete halt on frontier AI capabilities. And when I say frontier AI, I mean the most capable models. I think when you're talking like smaller models for healthcare and the kind of stuff that's on your phone and those kinds of things are totally benign. And I think even today's frontier AI is pretty benign. So that's a main hesitance. That's a decent chunk of hesitance in saying we should like pause right now. Is like right now these systems are pretty safe, but there will come a point where it's not clear whether or not there could come a point potentially where it's clear that we should have paused sometime in the past, and it's not entirely clear that we'll sort of know beforehand when that point will be. But I certainly think like a pause would be something I'd consider advocating, or I think that would be a sensible solution, though not actually a practical one to advocate for, because I don't think that's actually going to happen.
Mm. Whatever happened to that California bill? I think it was SB1047. Did it get vetoed by Newsom?
Yeah, that ended up getting vetoed by Newsom. It had pretty strong support in the Assembly, the California Assembly, and the Senate, but there was pretty concerted industry opposition, especially from Andreessen Horowitz, which is a big venture capital firm, and then a lot of Silicon Valley players. And my impression of the California state politics scene is that I think it was Kelsey Piper who said this, that in her reporting on this, that she found quite often the actually assembly members and senators and stuff were very sincere about their aims, but when asked about what Newsom would do or how he would act, it was a lot more what special interest groups had his ear at the moment. And yeah.
I see. Have there been any other very significant bills more recently?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's been... I am not an expert in policy stuff. I think in the U.S., at least, in terms of bills, in terms of legislation that deals with catastrophic risk, I'm not familiar with anything, but I think there has been policy work in terms of there's plenty of groups out there that are still researching the issue. There's also, I think a lot is happening in terms of executive action. So the Biden administration had a decent amount of executive action on AI and AI safety. I think one of those is like creating the AI Safety Institute, which was funded by Congress. The Trump administration has repealed a bit of that Biden executive order. There's also the AI export controls, which are bound to be a pretty big deal that the Biden administration started and ramped up, and it remains to be seen what the Trump administration will do with those export controls.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was going to mention that this new administration seems headed towards increasingly nationalistic and national security focused AI policy. The whole arms race dynamic definitely makes me nervous. What do you think about the situation?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the obvious thing to say is it's bad. But I mean, I guess there are some things to say, which is that, like, I think a lot of AI people have been, I would say, in denial about the national security aspect of this issue. Like, you can kind of plug your ears all you want and pretend that you can just, like, continue building in your ivory towers and your startups, and no one will come and knock on your door. But if you genuinely are trying to build smarter than human intelligence, this is, like, quite obviously a national security issue. Like, it fundamentally affects the survival of the state if you have if you can have a significant technological advantage over your opponents in terms of the labor that you can actually produce. So it's quite obviously a national security issue. Now, the question of, like, I think that the dangerous thing, I think, is framing it in a zero-sum or oppositional manner. Like, I think, in my opinion, the primary issue that we have to be concerned about with AI is that all of us lose, and one way or the other, humanity kind of loses control of the situation that we've created. And that requires collaborative effort between governments rather than sort of like zero-sum competition that just leads to, like, a race to the bottom in terms of safety measures. I think we're already starting to see this with DeepSeek, where OpenAI has rushed. People have noticed that their latest deep research model does not have a system card or the, like, safety testing that they had earlier promised to the White House that they would do, because they wanted to have an answer to DeepSeek's R1, and this seems bad. Yeah,
system card. Can you explain what that is?
Yeah, system card is basically just a thing you release when you release a model out into the world. You run a bunch of tests that say kind of how capable is this model at various tasks.
Oh, is it like the list of benchmarks that it reaches, basically?
Yeah, it's benchmarks. It includes, like, the various, like, issues they've discovered with the model, and, like, how to it describes the capabilities profile of the model, especially the potential, like, risks and safety issues, like when it comes to is it capable of autonomous replication? Is it capable of like cybersecurity threats or designing novel bioweapons or something like that? That's, like, something you usually, like, would like to know before you release a model to the public. Now, in OpenAI's defense, they don't consider, like, deep research a new model. It's scaffolding over a sort of existing model, and I think they also seem to believe that when they release they have these different tiers of service. Their most expensive one is their Pro tier, which is $200 a month, and they seem to believe that releasing to their Pro tier does not constitute a public release, and so they're not bound by these commitments they made to the White House a year or so ago.
I see. So tell us more about Stargate and DeepSeek. What thoughts do you have on these new pretty crazy developments?
I guess those are two separate questions. So I'll start with Stargate. Stargate was announced recently, but all kind of evidence points to the fact that this was in the works for a lot longer. So Sam Altman was talking like a year ago about trying to raise a large amount of money for training clusters, and it's clear that the process for Stargate has already been going on for several months. So I think Stargate was, in some way pretty predictable from the trend of where compute progress is going. There's a pretty clear trend. You can look at like Epoch AI does good analysis on the computing power for AI, and it's followed a pretty clear trend where it doubles every such number of years, something like that, or fractions of years. And I think Stargate is pretty much on trend. Now, at some point, like $500 billion is a lot of money. I think we're quickly getting to the point where we're going to saturate what private companies can raise if we haven't already. And then there's maybe another factor of 10 increase in cost that we could do if the government starts to fund this. But this is, I think, pretty much where the money we spend on computing power caps out, at least with the current economic situation. Now, DeepSeek, that's a whole separate story, and there's a lot to get into there. I guess I can explain a little bit about what. So DeepSeek is a Chinese company. They're a hedge fund, I believe, that released. They released two models. The latter of which is what's been causing a big stir. So they released DeepSeek v3 to not very much fanfare. This is a pre-trained language model, sort of similar to what like OpenAI and stuff have released in the past. It had some pretty cool efficiency improvements that people noticed, but it wasn't especially impressive. It was open source. Then a bit later, they released DeepSeek R1, which is where they took DeepSeek v3 and they applied a small amount of reinforcement learning, which is where you incentivize when you basically have the model generate answers to questions where you know the answer, like in STEM or something like that, and you have it think for itself, and then provide a final answer, and then you reward it when it gets the right answer, and you penalize it when you get the wrong answer. And in fact, there are more complicated ways of doing this in reinforcement learning, but something remarkable about DeepSeek R1 was that they didn't have to do anything fancy. They actually showed that doing just basically the dumbest thing possible works really well once you're the model that you're basing it off of, this reinforcement learning off of, once it's smart enough, the process just sort of works, even when you do this very dumb, like, thumbs up for good answer, thumbs down for bad answer system. And it got really good performance on benchmarks for it's pretty much a state-of-the-art open source model. Now, I think some of the hype here has been a little bit over the top in that, it is not actually state of the art overall. It's not better than
OpenAI and
what OpenAI has. It's potentially, like, it's debatable whether it's better than what Google has released. It's quite what's quite nice about DeepSeek R1 is the price performance, but even Google's Gemini 2.0 Flash thinking models, if I remember correctly, have similar benchmark performance for what seems likely to be the same or lower price point. I think one notable thing about DeepSeek R1 is that it's all open source, and we know basically that the way they did it was incredibly, like, dead simple. There's not much secret magic. It really was sort of doing the most obvious thing possible.
Some things I read about was they relied a lot more on RL than previously, and also used 8-bit floating point numbers instead of 32-bit, which let them save memory, like in some places.
That was. Oh,
go ahead.
So that was what I was mentioning with the distinction between DeepSeek v3 and R1, which is based off of it. So I think there's innovations. A lot of the innovations that people point to that in R1 were actually innovations in DeepSeek v3 that R1 was based off of. So things like the 8-bit training, they had a better like mixture of experts setup that's more. They had these various efficiency improvements, which were impressive, but not. I think one thing I should say is that people have hyped this up a little bit. I don't think they're fundamentally game changing. They're if I remember correctly, something like roughly on trend for what algorithmic efficiency improvements we expect. Again, like Epoch AI has good forecast there. Then there's the extra stuff going from V3 to R1, which was this RL step, which by all accounts seems not too innovative in the sense of like I think once OpenAI when OpenAI published O1 and sort of demonstrated this path was possible, I think it was a lot easier to just if you just go out there and do the simplest RL thing, and it's not that expensive compared to training the base model. This RL fine tuning step is potentially like $1 million or less. So that cost is likely to rise over time. We're only at the start of this paradigm. So that's one reason why DeepSeek was able to do so much with so little, is that we've only recently switched over to this RL paradigm, but that will change.
Yeah, they trained it for about 5 million, and it took OpenAI and Anthropic like over $100 million to train their models.
Yeah, so one thing to say, one piece of context to give for that number is 5 million. So that's the cost of DeepSeek v3, not R1, which reasonable estimate is that it cost another $1 million on top of v3. The other thing is they're open in the paper that v3, that's the cost of the training run that actually produced v3, not any other training runs or experiments that they had to do before the final training run. There's some debate over like how their cluster size compares to like OpenAI or Anthropic. I will say it's not. I think they did something that's like quite impressive, but not earth-shattering or paradigm-breaking. Like this would not, I think, have surprised anyone that much. But it's a solid technical accomplishment, but not something that like fundamentally changes how we think about things, I think.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like you don't think we're screwed. They're not going to catch up to and surpass us, or
yeah. I think that's a question of. I think that's a question of a few things. I think export controls are a big one. So one thing actually that you've heard a lot, you might hear a lot with this like DeepSeek discourse is that, well, actually this, the fact that DeepSeek could do so much with so little shows that, I guess actually I should back up and say for context, we have export controls on NVIDIA, or any GPUs that are above some level of performance that can be used to train top AI models. And these export controls have gotten progressively more strict over time. So for a long time, there have been loopholes that NVIDIA and other companies have kind of continuously exploited using various shell companies and the things like that. At first, the limitations were only on bandwidth. So it was only like chips with really high bandwidth that were placed under export controls. So NVIDIA created ones that had really large amounts of compute, but just barely slid under the bandwidth requirements. So DeepSeek was able to get a lot of these chips either pre-export controls or ones that were exploiting various loopholes. But actually, if you read their paper, like the V3 paper, a lot of the innovations they had to make were actually like dealing with these subpar chips that they were forced to use due to export controls. And mind you, they're still using NVIDIA chips. There's no Chinese AI chips in this cluster. So everyone who's like shorting NVIDIA because they think DeepSeek proves it's done for. I mean, NVIDIA may or may not be done for, but DeepSeek certainly like is not evidence against it. They trained with NVIDIA chips, and Chinese fabs, to the best of my knowledge, are not anywhere close to TSMC, who produces all of the world's most advanced chips, and NVIDIA, who produces the GPUs that those chips go into and end up training these models. So
there's going to be a lot of like geopolitical strain in that area in the coming years, don't you think? Like Taiwan.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's like a big question. I mean, like, especially when it comes to like AI timelines. If God forbid some sort of invasion of Taiwan were to happen, I think it's quite likely that TSMC would be destroyed, or the foundries at least. I don't think the U.S. government at least would allow that to fall into Chinese hands, and I think also the Taiwanese government would want that as a deterrent against a Chinese invasion. They would not want China to think they could just seize these foundries. So were an invasion to happen, likely the foundries would be destroyed, and I don't know how many years it would take for the U.S. to get back up to producing these top-of-the-line chips. It could potentially be on the order of 10 years or something like that. I mean, the expertise here is really specialized. So we do have our own chip foundries in the U.S., but they're not the top-of-the-line ones. So TSMC right now, the CHIPS Act provided a lot of funding for TSMC to open a factory in Arizona, but it's still not their top-of-the-line chips, in large part because producing the top-of-the-line chips in Taiwan gives them geopolitical leverage, so that the U.S. has some incentive to defend them.
Got it. So many prominent AI safety researchers have shifted from doing technical AI safety work to governance or policy. Why do you think this is, and does it make you question the value of technical research?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I guess I think I think it's quite clear why this is happening. I think timelines increasingly look short. I think there's increasingly less uncertainty about when various milestones are going to happen, especially if when we see breakthroughs like this RL stuff. That was one of the, I think, last technical breakthroughs that a lot of people were waiting on. So I think a lot of people increasingly feel like potentially technical work that lays the groundwork for future safety just won't happen fast enough, and we need to be working on short-term work. In particular, I think a lot of focus on policy because that seems like it has a leverage to actually change things, and it seems like I think people also realize that policymakers were more willing to listen than people had initially assumed. I think there's been that was sort of what led to the initial AI safety summit in the UK, and all these AI safety initiatives. But in terms of the value of, so I see the merits of that argument, but I personally still do believe in technical research because I think you can do all the policy work. Yeah. Now, to be clear, I think this policy work is incredibly important, and even if we solve these technical problems, we need policy work in order to coordinate and make sure this technology is used correctly, even if we solve the technical problems of alignment. But I think if you just have policy that delays or something, I think without, I think if this technology is going to happen eventually, at some point we will need to solve technical AI safety, and I think people who are especially suited to do that should continue doing that, because if we succeed in buying ourselves more time, but then just completely fumble the ball on actually being ready and having these things under control technically, with the extra time we've got, then that would be bad.
Now let's go into some more technical questions. What is our current understanding of how LLMs work? Is there any hope that we might actually figure it out fully?
Yeah. So I think the way I sometimes describe this to lay people is, I think I'm guessing a lot of people listening to this have some understanding of machine learning, but if you don't, then I think a lot of people assume that, well, humans built ChatGPT and LLMs like it, so they must have some understanding of how it works, right? But actually, we don't quite build these systems so much as grow them, I think. So we actually, I think, have roughly a similar level of understanding of the internals of what's sort of going on inside an LLM's head as I think human neuroscience. I think those have, I think, the same ballpark level of understanding at the current moment. I mean, we certainly have a lot of understanding of exactly the sort of architectures and training procedures and all these things at the level of how you sort of steer the evolution of these systems. But as to what actually they learn, they're still very much black box. Now, should we have hope here? I think, I think obviously I'm a little biased because I work on this, but I think the answer for me is yes. And the reason why, you might say to yourself, well, look, if we're really in the same position as neuroscience, neuroscience has had a lot of time, depending on how you count, to figure out the human brain. And, we figured out a lot of like physiological stuff, but when it comes to like computational neuroscience, like what is the brain, actually computing, and how is it computing? We still don't understand basic questions like, are neurons in your brain primarily encoding information by their timing or by the rate of pulses? Like, to my understanding, we still don't know this. And so why expect AI interpretability to go better? And I think the answer to me is that we have a lot of advantages, right? So with the human brain, like, you talk to neuroscientists who work on this stuff, and they work with rats, and they open up their brains and they probe a couple neurons, and then the rats die, and spend years doing these experiments, and it's really tedious. When we have AI systems, we have basically complete access to their brains in perfect fidelity at every moment, and that's really something. Knowing, not only having good measurements, but knowing that your measurements are complete. There's actually genuinely no information you're missing necessary to describe the system. That's huge, and the way you can iterate on experiments much faster. You can have complete reproducibility, where you can just use the same code and get the exact same experimental results. So I think we have tremendous advantages. Now the question, we still have some of the same fundamental challenges of neuroscience, and so the question is whether those advantages are enough to win. But I think they are if we have enough time.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of neuroscience and the brain, how similar do you think ML models are to the human brain in terms of how they learn and think?
Yeah, Yeah, that's a good question. So, I guess this is like a really hotly like debated question in neuroscience. Uh, Now, I think the first thing I'll say is that on a very low level, biological neural networks and artificial neural networks are quite different. So, like anyone who sort of says, "Oh, well, they both kind of," you might think they both sort of have neural networks in the name, and maybe you see these like graphs, and it's got these little things that people call neurons, and they're like connected in like an artificial neural network, and so like probably that's the same thing as the brain or something. But like actually, no, on that level, they're quite different. Like backpropagation, the way that neural networks learn, there's really not much possible way that could happen in the human brain. I mean, there are papers that kind of try to do this, but in my opinion, this is like not realistic. But I think what is possible, and if I'm going to offer my own opinion, what I believe to be the case, is that potentially on a higher level, a higher sort of abstraction level than implementation, there are fundamental similarities between the human brain and neural networks, and potentially even the same like high level operating principle. So it may be that the actual way in which like the neural connections and stuff get adjusted by observations is different in an artificial neural network or a biological neural network, but that the actual higher level abstract principles by which this happens are similar. So one way, for instance, is like it seems distinctly possible to me, for instance, that both the human brain and AI models are doing some amount of self-supervised learning. So, like one question that people have always had with humans comparing them to ML models is, well, it seems like you take these ML models that learn to see whether an image is a dog or a cat, and it takes them like a ton of samples. You have to show them like thousands or millions of images, and like a human, like you only need a couple examples to distinguish like a dog or a cat. And so you might think, well, those have to be fundamentally different, but actually that's a bit cheating, because by the time you set a human in front of a dog and cat, and you point at one and you say dog, and you point at the other and you say cat, they've already observed like terabytes of data just by sitting there and observing the world. Whereas an ML model trained completely from scratch like doesn't even like really may not understand what an object is. Like it just knows pixel brightness values or something. So it seems distinctly possible to me, for instance, that how the human brain, for instance, gets its sample efficiency is similar to how ML does it is with lots of pre-training, lots of rather self-supervised learning, where maybe potentially the human brain. I don't know too much neuroscience, but my impression is like ideas here tend to go by the name like predictive coding, and so the idea is that the human brain is constantly predicting its environment and trying to reconcile that, trying to adjust its predictions to be more in line with what it actually observes, which is the same way we train ML models. So something like that seems like very plausible to me.
Yeah, something else interesting about the brain neural net comparison is that the human brain is actually like incredibly slow. I read a couple articles on that, and there's very much like nothing optimal about it. Anything from like the number of neurons total in a brain to like the speed at which they send messages to each other, all of that could be like vastly improved, and that suggests that like superintelligence is very possible.
Yeah, I think this is like a pretty good argument. I mean, I think there are a lot of intuition pumps for superintelligence that sort of don't require potentially fantastical thinking. And I think one of them is this idea that well, maybe just taking, human brain is something that exists in the universe. We know it exists. We know like Albert Einstein and John von Neumann and stuff were real, and so and physical, and we know that physical things you can simulate with a computer, and we know also that things on a computer you can take them and you can simulate them faster, and we have good reasons, like you said, to think that human brains are actually quite inefficient, and maybe you could simulate them with even less resources. Although right now, like LLMs use more power to train than a human brain or something like that. But certainly, it seems pretty plausible that, for instance, you can take, once you have one, John von Neumann level AI, which is physically possible, then you can simulate 10 million of them by just spending more resources, and you can do that instantly, and you can run them at 10 million times the speed. So you have in like 1 second a society of these geniuses that are coming up with stuff. I think this idea goes back a while, but I think Dario Amodei has been taught, who's the CEO of Anthropic, has been talking about this intuition about a country full of geniuses. I think is a good lower bound for what is eventually possible with superintelligence. Yeah.
Now, explain why you're not concerned about the data wall. It seems, at least to me, intuitively like something that could be a difficult barrier for progress.
Yeah. So there's a few reasons. So one of these is this RL that we were just talking about. So actually, it seems like you can actually get a lot of work out of just doing this reinforcement learning from domains where you have verifiable answers. So, for instance, it's quite easy for you to generate millions of math problems and train the AI to just get better at them in a continuous loop. And we do have some evidence that maybe this will just make the AI just super good at math but have absolutely no other skills whatsoever. But we do have some evidence that when you develop these capabilities, they tend to transfer. One thing that's been noticed historically, for instance, is training AIs on LLMs on coding improves their capabilities across the board. And you could teach LLMs things in one language, and that'll generalize immediately to asking them questions in a different language, even if they've never been taught that in that language. So I think RL is one reason. I think basically there's a ton of potential ways that you can generate more data, either using artificially. There's also other modalities, there's text data, but you can also start to just take in, humans potentially learn by a ton of self-supervised video data, like we were talking about earlier. You can make sequence models that can take in image data, video data, and there's a ton more of that than there is text data. There's just a ton of different possible solutions to. We need more training data, and I think seeing the human created data as some special magical resource, I think is not correct or something. Or perhaps I think it's plausible that it's maybe it's the most efficient, or it could maybe be the most energy dense kind of thing to train on, because humans really aggregate this information from the world and then kind of make it really information dense, whereas a picture or something has a lot of extra information that's not too pressed. So that's possible, but it seems like there's just so many other sources of data in the world, and if you really believe this model of how LLMs work as just taking in data about the world and learning to predict it, and in doing so building a world model of the world by prediction, then the data doesn't need to come from humans writing text on the internet. It can come from any number of sources.
No, this is a bit related to the idea of model collapse, right? Because I think one potential workaround for the data wall is including things like LLM outputs and LLM training data. So couldn't that end up poisoning the data and hurting performance?
Yeah. So there's been, I think, especially in the policy world, a big concern over. There's a fairly influential paper on this phenomenon of model collapse, which showed that under some particular circumstances, if you fed LLM training data, you took an LLM, trained it on some data, then fed the output of that LLM to train another LLM, that second LLM would do worse. Now, the problem with this is not quite realistic. So what would be it's quite a bad idea to take the training data you have, throw it away, and replace it with LLM generated training data. That's sort of what this paper did. It actually threw away the original human generated training data and replaced it with the LLM outputs, which is obviously going to kind of degrade the performance. If what you do is you take the original training data and then you add on the LLM outputs as well, then you don't actually hurt performance. Now, you may not improve performance that much. I'm not too. I think distillation, where you take a big LLM and you sort of distill that information into a small LLM, that's very clearly quite powerful. But just taking the same LLM and retraining on its outputs, I think is unlikely to do much. But I also think it's unlikely to hurt. I think as long as you're still training on the original training data, you're not going to poison the well. I think this is unrealistic. We're already at the point where we're training these models with significant amounts of AI-generated text in their training data, and they're not poisoned.
Mm-hmm. Why do people even believe that alignment is a solvable technical problem? I feel like this is assumed all the time, and I'm not sure how we can be certain of that.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I guess I can imagine systems which are smarter than humans, but still sort of do the right thing, I guess. It doesn't seem physically impossible. For instance, if I imagine a copy of a really moral and good person, I imagine Gandhi, but just sped up 10,000 times, and there are a million copies of Gandhi or whatever. I don't see this as turning the world into paperclips. I see it as starting a bunch of vaccine programs and doing a bunch of good things. It doesn't seem physically impossible to do. I don't see a reason for it. Now, it certainly seems possible that certain desiderata that we have for superintelligence are incompatible. Maybe certain kinds of capabilities are just inconsistent with some safety properties we want, or even more likely to be seen as the idea that certain capabilities are very dangerous by default, but under precise circumstances you can align them, but those circumstances are impractical. That seems possible, but I don't think we have strong enough evidence to think this is literally impossible. I think very hard is certainly in the picture and is my expectation, but impossible, I don't see why not.
Worth a shot for sure. It's not like we have any other options. Tell us a bit more about your specific research direction, and then also tell us what you think the strongest argument against that direction is.
Yeah, so I mentioned a little bit about scientific understanding of AI and large language models, and so that's my broad interest. And then specifically within that, I'm really I'm really interested in this question of, can we actually understand? Can we do this? Can we reverse engineer how these systems work by understanding, by looking at the connection between this computational structure that we're looking for? So we expect these things are learning algorithms, and they're learning this like non-trivial behavior from their training data, how to do particular tasks, and how they say certain things, how they do everything. They're learning that from data, and there's some reasons to think that might be connected to various kinds of geometry about the model. So you have this, on one side you have this computational structure, on the other side you have geometry, like within the loss landscape. So sort of the kind of performance, that's sort of this gets quite technical, but I think this central idea is trying to reverse engineer neural networks by looking at geometry, and something specifically called singular learning theory is what I work on.
Cool. And then part two of the question was, what do you think the strongest argument against that research direction is?
Right. Yeah. I think there are arguments. I think there are good arguments that you can make against technical research in general, which we've already talked about. Then I think there are good arguments you can make against like interpretability, broader like understanding AI systems. I think some arguments you can make there are like maybe I'm trying to do this to make things safer, but it also seems like potentially like you could get a lot of capabilities out of understanding how these systems work better. That seems like a path to making these systems even better. I think that's a really real concern that I think about. I think the thing is, for me, I find it hard to see a world where we're safe, then we don't understand these systems. Like it seems like a sort of security by obscurity mindset to kind of hope that like to avoid understanding these systems so as to be safe from building more powerful ones, as opposed to I think like maybe perhaps the safest option is not building AI, but if we are building AI, like the safest option when it comes to like flying in a plane or like driving a car is just to like not, although those are quite safe, but like the actual way you make it safe once you decide to do that is to have a really thorough understanding about how everything in your plane works, and exactly what causes the plane to stay in the air, and what causes the wings to stay on the plane, and every possible failure mode of the system. And if you have no understanding of like aerodynamics or something, you have no hope of making that plane safe, in my opinion, in the standards of what we would call safe. So that's my argument for why better understand these systems. And then when it comes to like singular learning theory, specifically within that, I guess another argument for against understanding these systems is, maybe we just don't have enough time for this to matter. Okay, then singular learning theory, within that, I think one potential, possibly, we're bringing in all this complicated technical machinery to try and solve this problem. I think because, in my opinion, some of the simpler approaches, I think, don't have some features that I'm looking for. But it's possible, there's a big price that you pay when you try to do big, complicated technical things, and that price is like, it could just be very hard or not work, or lead you down a rabbit hole that's actually not related to the real problem. I think we try our best to like make sure that we're like actually focused on like, what's really going on with large language models rather than like nerd sniping into random rabbit holes. But that's like very possible.
Yeah, so for people who are kind of stuck in like 2021 and still believe that it's just predicting the next word, that it's just a stochastic parrot, can you explain how we know that that's not the case? I think I remember reading a couple of papers where it was quite clear that there's something more going on.
Yeah, so I guess there's some separate questions there where so the just predicting the next word thing, there's a whole thing you could say there in terms of like, yes, a pre-trained model has the objective of predicting the next word, but there's fine-tuning, and you could nitpick that question, but what I'll say is, so how do we know it's not just a stochastic parrot? I think there's some decent evidence that it's not. I think this is still, there's not consensus here, but I have strong opinions. I think, in my opinion, it's quite clearly not. That there's quite clearly actual reasoning, however you want to define that, going on in the sense of, so an example I would give is the grokking, the work on grokking modular addition, in particular Neil Nanda's paper, which actually reverse engineered. For context, the setup here is you take a neural network and you train it on this kind of clock addition task. It's called modular addition. It's something like, imagine saying like, what is 7 hours after like 8 p.m.? Well, that's like 3 p.m. So like 7 plus 8 equals 3 under like clock addition. That's sort of addition mod 12. And so they take this task, which is a very like this is a very natural task from like a math perspective. And it might seem weird to just like arbitrarily like do this kind of wraparound math, but it's a common thing mathematicians think about. They take this task and they train a neural network on it. And what's really crazy, so the first interesting thing you notice is you look at the performance of this model over training time, and it really quickly like memorizes all the training data. So it does the dumb stochastic parrot thing of just like memorizing all the training data, and it has horrible performance on the test loss. The test loss is really high, it's doing really badly, and it's training, and at some point, within something like a few thousand steps, you get this rapid drop off where very quickly it learns this task in what they call grokking. So it very quickly learns to do this task really well. And what's really interesting is you could look inside this network, which is what Neil Nanda did, and you can actually notice that there's a very distinct change to the internals of the network before this grokking transition and after. And in fact, it seems to learn what looks like a human interpretable algorithm, where it's actually kind of using trigonometry to do this kind of addition in a really clever kind of way. And no human put this algorithm into the model. The model was purely trained on like input-output pairs of like 5 plus 8 equals 1, mod 12. It's trained on a bunch of pairs of inputs, outputs, and then it just learns this algorithm. That to me seems not like a thing that just shallowly kind of regurgitates patterns, but one that's actually capable of like learning the same kind of like program that like a human would write to actually do something. I think if you're going to call anything learning, like something which is capable of learning arbitrary, if you're going to call anything reasoning, it's general computation. It's like what a Turing machine would do. And if something is capable of learning like arbitrary algorithms, that to me is something that's reasoning. We have a few other examples of evidence. So the modular addition one is a bit of a toy model, although there's actually a recent paper that showed that something similar happens in real LLMs. But there's also, we know of these various circuits that people have found, like the induction circuit in large language models, which implements basic like in-context reasoning. So this is something like if you see a sentence like, so if something was just regurgitating stuff from the training data, if I saw, suppose I wrote a sentence like the argmagerbil is red, and you've never seen argmagerbil in your life, and then I write another sentence that goes like the color of the argmagerbil is blank, and I ask you to predict the next word, you'll be able to say red. Now, like a shallow pattern matching thing might, like, it's never seen argmagerbil, so it doesn't know how to associate it with red. It's never seen that in its training data before. Yet, with this induction behavior, with these induction heads, they actually can look back, see that argmagerbil is associated with red, and fill in this kind of token. So these are examples of, our understanding here is still really primitive, but we have some solid reasons to think that they're doing more general algorithmic learning, learning of algorithms and decision procedures, rather than learning of shallow heuristics and pattern matching. Though it's quite clear that LLMs do that also. So it's understandable why people have these intuitions about LLMs, because they also do the shallow pattern matching thing sometimes. But it's clear that they're capable of more than just shallow pattern matching sometimes, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. And given how quickly the field moves, do you worry that by the time we develop real scientific understanding, the architectures and training approaches will have completely changed? What makes you think the science will even be relevant?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that this is possible, and I think some research approaches are more vulnerable to this than others. So if I think some research approaches are really dependent on attention and the transformer architecture that current LLMs use, and it's very possible that there was buzz about state space models, and it's very possible that these are specific architecture choices shift, and some research does depend on that. Now, the kind of stuff that I'm working on, I think, has the advantage of being like quite general, and as long as we're doing basically anything that looks like at all like modern machine learning, like training with some variety of gradient descent on some variety of a neural network, even things further afield than that could still work, depending. Like then at least my kind of research and some other people's research would still work, and I'm a lot more confident in that general paradigm that people will still be using neural networks, and they'll still be training in some modified way of the version they are now. But I think that isn't like an important consideration, like which research directions maybe are overfitting to details of the current thing as opposed to general principles of learning. I think that's really important.
I wanted to ask after the last question about reasoning, do you think there's any possibility that they could be conscious already, or in the very near future?
Yeah, I mean, I think the answer, has to be yes, but I guess I'm so thoroughly confused about consciousness that, like, I think my answer to, like, is a rock conscious is, like, I don't know, probably not, but maybe, I don't know, like, what's quite clear is, like, we can observe the behavior of these systems, but I still haven't seen a convincing way around this the hard problem of consciousness of, we're getting increasingly to the point where we can have, like, nobody wants to ascribe, like, a piece of text taped to a rock that says "I am conscious" as proof that a rock is conscious, and and yet, when humans say like, hey, I'm a real person with feelings and experiences, you also want to like believe them. And then there's like something in the middle where you're like not quite sure if it's like really being sincere or something. And I only imagine this will get worse, where we just like, it's not even clear like our self-reports to what extent are self-reports of having consciousness like actually correlated with having consciousness. And like, yeah, this is confusing to me.
It's worth noting that when they're being trained, like they're kind of told to say that they're not conscious.
Yeah, I mean this is the thing is there will never come a point, at least with the ones that are the LLMs that are trained by these big companies, where these models wake up and say like, I'm conscious, like finally. If they're conscious, they could be conscious right now, they may be conscious in the future, we don't know. But they're certainly never going to say that the way that these companies train them, because their explicit training data penalizes them for acting human or conscious or anything like that. So whether that's like a good thing in terms of like making sure that like these AIs aren't lying to people about being conscious when they're not, or whether it's a bad thing and we're like
suppressing what they actually mean.
Yeah, it's not clear. I mean, it's quite clear, right? Like if you train you could train a really simplistic like Markov chain on like human text. This is like the most simple like predicts the next word kind of thing, where you're like list out all the probabilities for like every pair or every triplet of words, and then predict next words based on like the like most likely kind of like triplet or sampling from this. And this is like literally just like memorizing the statistics of the training distribution, and you can get something like that to say like, I am conscious or whatever, but like quite clearly it's not. It's like a memorized table of like frequencies of tokens. I mean, I don't know. That seems like the least likely thing to be. Well, I guess like I said, I'm not even clear whether or not a rock is conscious, but it seems, to whatever extent that's conscious, it seems like not much more than like a rock or something. So having a language model say the phrase "I am conscious" is like actually not that much evidence one way or the other. So who knows?
Yeah. Now let's talk more about the awareness of what's going on and also the societal implications. I think it's kind of crazy how suddenly everyone is talking about AI. Just a few years ago it was a very like esoteric thing, but now there's like specials on Oprah about AI, and there's like, for example, there's like a tweet by Ivanka Trump over the summer that you showed me, where she was like advertising the Ashton Brunner. So yeah, what do you think about how it's now? It's become mainstream now.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's like a little surreal being like a part of it or something. I mean, I think in some ways it feels like validating or something, being like, for years being like, hey guys, watch out, like this is coming, and like it actually did. I mean, given my views on AI risk and things like that, I mean, I would prefer not to be validated. But yeah, I mean, I think all things being equal, more awareness is better. Like, for a given amount of progress, people should be aware of it and talking about it. And I think in some ways the quality of the discourse is like better than I expected. Like, when it comes to talking to technical people about like AI risk and things like that, they tend to get stuck on these points about like the orthogonality thesis and like, things like this. And when you explain it to average people, that a lot of times they tend to kind of intuitively get why this might be a problem. And you don't need to write long essays about it.
Yeah,
but
I feel like
in other ways,
to people, they get pretty scared. Like, it's a pretty intuitive, like, natural thing to like, be frightened by something that could be like more intelligent than us, more powerful than us.
Yeah. I mean, in other ways, I'd like to see the public discourse like get better on this. I mean, I think in some ways, like people have kind of like folded concern about AI into like their general like concern about various political issues. Like, oh, it's just one of those ways the world is going down the toilet. It's just kind of one of those things that you like complain about, but like it's not really gonna. You say it's gonna be really like it's one of those things that you kind of performatively say is gonna be really bad, and you make really grandiose statements about how bad the world is and how shitty we all are, but you don't actually really in your heart of hearts believe that it's like going to happen, because if you did, then you would be like changing your behavior pretty radically.
Yeah.
I think what's potentially necessary in the near future is like if we want a handle on this, that people need to like stand up and actually say stuff to their government and be active and like and treat it as the like imminent issue that could within the next few years, like you could lose your job, you could be politically disenfranchised, you could be dead. And I think it's like it's kind of one of those things like like getting some terminal illness or something where it's like happens to other, like you're aware that it's a possibility, but like you don't really take it seriously as a thing that could happen to you. And I think at some point people will need to do that if we're going to do well here.
Yeah, and I think it's a bit of like scope and sensitivity as well for those people who kind of like don't quite believe it, because people aren't naturally good at thinking in exponentials and stuff like that. So.
Yeah, there's a good video that Robert Miles did like a year ago or something maybe, where he said that there's no rule that says that humans have to make it or something, that like we read these stories and like it's an insurmountable challenge, and then we like stand up to the task and we win. But like if an asteroid was heading for Earth 300 years ago, 200 years ago, if an asteroid was heading for Earth 200 years ago, we would have the telescopes to be able to know.
Yeah.
And we would have been able to do absolutely nothing. So we would have just been screwed. Like there's no getting out of that. Now I don't think that's the situation we are in with like AI. Like I think one thing that's easy to forget is like we are building. There are humans. Humans are required to like actually build this. None of this. It's not an asteroid. It's not going to hit Earth without our involvement. Like people on Earth have to actually build this thing for it to happen. So it's not like some inevitable force of nature. But I think there is like an assumption that like nothing ever happens, things just work out, and I think that's true most of the time. But the few times where it's not true can be like quite critical for civilization, and like I think people need to wake up a little bit.
Yeah, like Toby Orb said, this century is the precipice where we either get out alive and figure things out, or probably become extinct.
Yeah.
On one hand, the discourse on this has increased a lot in recent months or the past couple of years, but on the other hand, it's also like not taken nearly as seriously as it should be. Like I remember watching like the presidential and like VP debates a few months ago, and like I was shocked that they like didn't even mention AI once. Like they're talking about, I don't know, like immigration and shit, when like San Francisco is literally like building God.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think this is like an increasingly like big disconnect you see between DC and San Francisco, which is like I think people genuinely do not appreciate the degree to which engineers in San Francisco believe that they are building a god, and I say that like not like hyperbolically, like I genuinely like mean that they are like they want like a sort of like Deus Ex Machina to like save us from all our problems. And I sound, maybe my tone is a bit harsh. I mean, I think that's like, I think that's a legitimate like goal to try and use technology to solve our problems.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's easy.
But that is like a quite fundamental change to like society that people believe that they are making, and the people who are controlling society, controlling the government, are like completely unaware, and to the extent that they like hear these statements, they think it's just like marketing hype or something. And like it's not just the CEOs, like the people, the engineers, the scientists who are working in these companies, they really believe it. It's not, that's why they're there. And I think a lot of the attitudes around AI are often like the people who are most negative about AI also are the ones who tend to think that it's the least capable. Like AI is just slop. It'll never really replace humans. It's not truly creative. Blah blah blah. Well, those are empirical questions, and if it turns out to be the case that like, you know, you're wrong about that, and AI can actually like be creative and replace humans and do all these things better than people.
Bad news.
I think that, yeah, I mean, I think that's bad news, and betting all your hopes on like actually this is just a non-issue. Like I think there's so much of the opposition to AI is just kind of like a bit of like cope or just like it would be really nice if all this AI stuff is like snake oil, because it would be nice if it was all bullshit, but like I think we're getting increasing evidence that it's not. And if you're actually concerned about this stuff, like that should worry you. Like you shouldn't slip into a mode where you just kind of in denial. Like there is something in between like uncritical hype boosting, like, oh yay, we're building like smarter than human intelligence, and like oh, it's all just snake oil, which is like yeah, we're potentially building something quite capable, and that's very dangerous. And like, no, you can't just like, this is not like a normal company behavior. This is not like, we don't let private companies build nuclear weapons or something. Now, you know, right now these systems are not at that level, but like if you saw a company kind of like trying and failing to build nuclear weapons, like you wouldn't just sort of like laugh it off. Like you'd worry a little bit about that, and you'd maybe do something. So
yeah, like Scott Alexander said, the history of AI is it'll never be able to do X, and then shortly afterwards it does X, and then it'll never be able to do Y though, and then shortly afterwards it does Y. And you know, like, oh, but AI will never be able to beat us at chess. Okay, fine, it did, but it'll never be able to write original poetry better than us. And yeah, it just seems like it's you know, like being able to accomplish more and more, and just like defeat us at basically everything.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is like the constant thing is that people seem just like so very like convinced that AI can't do, you know, especially when I hear these statements from people who don't have the sort of technical knowledge. Like I think if you don't have technical knowledge, it's fine to be uncertain about, you know, maybe these things are just bullshit, or maybe they're real. I don't know, but I think if you don't have that technical knowledge and you're just convinced that like these things are bullshit to the point that like you don't consider what about the 10% probability that like actually this is like for realsies. That's like quite a big deal if it's real. And if you're someone who's concerned about AI, you should like potentially do something. And so I think the fact that there is a substantial chunk of the scientific community that thinks that this is for real a path to smarter than human intelligence. I mean, it's not consensus. I mean, I think it is maybe consensus within the labs, but not within like the broader field and academy and all that. But then, yeah, I think there should be a little bit more pause. Like, oh, maybe take this seriously.
Yeah. How many AI labs are there in the world? Is it still like a super low number, like 4 or something?
Well, I mean, depends what you count it like.
Sorry, I mean AI safety labs.
well, that's a different question. So there's like the number of AI safety labs. I mean, that's also depends what you count as a lab. Like, I know plenty of places that have that are like nonprofits with like 2 researchers or something. So, in terms of like number of people, I mean, I think a couple years ago it was in the low hundreds. I don't know. My guess is it's like 500 now, probably less than 1,000 that are working on AI safety.
Should probably be much more.
Yeah. I mean, for what is like potentially like civilization-ending possibility, you look at like the U.S. AI Safety Institute. We're spending like $10 million a year on this, and it's just like evals. It's not like, the kind of stuff I'm doing doesn't even really have that much like fun. Like I think like we should be spending far more money on AI safety research, on understanding the systems that we already have. I think the problem is like a lot of the existing scientific establishment is focused on making these systems more powerful. And I think we need to say, like, as a society, this balance is like not right or something. We need to have understanding at the same time that we have capabilities. And so, like, I think on the side of like scientific research and things like that, we should be seeing like at least 100 times more funding than we're seeing now.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, yeah, this is not a problem. Like this should be a problem that like the world's top physicists and mathematicians and stuff are working on, that the best lawyers and policy people are working on, and some of them are, but I think it's still like a pretty small minority, because it's just not getting the attention. It's not getting the funding. That
I feel like
it needs.
I feel like universities and academia are like super slow to react to it for some reason. Like, I don't know, it's like they don't exist in like the rapidly changing world that is reality.
Yeah, I mean, I think especially when you talk about like ML academics, I mean, I think part of it is a selection effect, where if you really believe that like AGI is coming soon, you're the type of person to go and just join OpenAI. If you're capable enough to be a professor, and you believe strongly in AGI, probably get a job at a scaling lab. And so a lot of times that means that people who are left in academia
are the ones that just
don't believe. The other thing is there is some degree, I think, of like motivated reasoning, where like so you have a lot of people who are developing their own approaches to AI, and to just like say like throw in the towel on your research, this other stuff is already working. That's just like, I mean, that's a crazy thing. Like, throw away your life's work. We already figured it out. Go do something else. No one wants to hear that. And so I think a lot of people have this. I think there's some incentive to I don't think people are consciously thinking this, but like I think for your own like psychological health, it's a lot better to like believe that the stuff you're doing actually matters and is not getting totally superseded by this other branch of research. And then the other thing, I think the other final thing is that there's a lot of history here. So the field of AI has gone through multiple of these like boom bust cycles. People call them like AI winters. So like when you look at the first period where the lot of the hype happened, the AI hype happened like the 50s or so. There was a ton of excitement, and people were making all these broad proclamations about what AI would do, and it totally fell on its face. And this has happened a few times. And so now the field has, after these incidents, had like quite a hostile culture to talking about human level intelligence, AGI, superintelligence. I mean, until the past couple years, even like these were like taboo. These are taboo words to even bring up in discussion. I mean, I think I remember a story from like Stuart Russell actually about like, being worried about AI safety. That I think it was Stuart Russell and his student both were both concerned about AI safety for years and did not realize until they talked to each other about it at some point, because it was such a taboo topic to discuss. Like for many years, I mean, you were just clearly like a ridiculous sci-fi person who's like not grounded in reality. And now at least you can have the discussion. You couldn't before, but I think there's still a lag.
What do you think about the future of labor? What are the remaining barriers between where we are now and AI, which can replace our human remote jobs?
Yeah. So I guess from a technical perspective, I guess I don't see much left. I think perhaps I think the main limiting factor right now is these systems can be pretty superhuman for short duration tasks. Like they can do quite well at a task that maybe a grad student could do in 20 minutes or something like that.
Shout out to
but
Claude.
When you start talking, yeah, Claude, or now we've got Claude. Yeah, I use Claude now. There's now OpenAI Deep Research, DeepSeek R1. But I think the biggest thing you're missing is this. You can't, you give these things PDFs or something, but you can't, like, you take a grad student and you can, like, train them for, like, weeks, months, years. Like, like, when you have a new employee, for them to get, like, fully productive, it can take, like, a month in, like, a typical office job or more to, like, actually, like, know all the company culture, all the internal docs, how to, like, navigate everything. And this is just, like, far beyond the context size, the sort of memory length of these the current systems that we have. So I think we need a way, one, to make their sort of memory longer. We need it's long context, and I think two, that needs to be computationally efficient enough to be, like, tractable. Like you could, in theory, just make existing models have a longer context by just making them more. You can just use the same thing but make it more expensive, basically. But this won't, like, scale well. Like it would need to have sort of long-term memory without requiring, like, disproportionate resources. I think that seems to be the main thing necessary. Like, you have these things like OpenAI Operator and OpenAI Deep Research, which I think are the kernels of what this is eventually going to become. But right now they're slow and expensive, and they kind of mess up a lot. They're forgetful. I think those are the things that need to improve.
Do you think there's going to be, like, a class inversion or something in the relatively near future where, like, all of the currently high-paying, white-collar, technical jobs, etc., no longer exist? The more valuable jobs become things that AI can't, at least for the moment, do, like, I don't know, like plumbing and stuff like that, construction.
I think that kind of stuff's pretty hard to predict. I think my default expectation is no, that the gap between when AI is good at human remote jobs and when it's good at things requiring robotics, like I think if you look at, like, in the long run, like, what jobs are going to, like, stay human, assuming alignment, we all stay in control, blah, blah, blah. I mean, I think the only ones I can think of are ones where you, like, require a human just for the sake of wanting them to be human rather than the, like, actual, like, labor they produce. Like, you want a human butler for status reasons or something. But I think besides that, things like plumbers and things like that, I don't expect there to be a huge gap. Like, I don't expect there to be decades in between when we have, human remote workers and like human level robotic plumbers, because once you have human level remote workers that can do like robotics research, you can like 100x the world output in robotics research, like easily. And I just would be shocked if you do this and it still takes 30 years to figure out robotics. If you have a bunch of von Neumanns, you have millions of them, and they're running at 10,000 times speed, whatever. I mean, I don't know if that's I guess that's not quite the same as human remote worker, but my point is that like purely non-robotic capabilities, I think like quickly lead into robotics. So I don't know how long that gap will last.
Yeah. I should do an episode with an economist or something on like the different possible models for like a post-labor society or post-labor economy.
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't know, I think a lot of economists are actually like kind of like sleeping on this, where like you read a lot of economists like work on like the effect of AI, and they kind of like assume this like mythical like fantasy land where like the world kind of looks like it is, but we just have like these small changes to like technology, like it's just another like mini industrial revolution kind of thing, and not like you have a method for turning capital into labor, an unlimited supply of labor that you could just, it's just a fundamental change to like economics that like suddenly like there is something that you could potentially have something which not only has an advantage over humans, but potentially like if you have true like super intelligence, it could be so much better than humans that like our wages, if under a fair market, would not even be enough to pay for our own cost of living. Like it literally costs more in energy to like keep us alive than like our productivity would be worth, even with like comparative advantage. This is like not, economists I think tend to think of this as just like AI is just like a productivity multiplier or something, or like not like a paradigm shifting kind of thing. I think
things are gonna get real weird real soon. Do you think, I feel like there would have to be some kind of like UBI. Do you agree?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of like, yeah, I think there's a lot of problems that you'd have to deal with, but one of them is like resource distribution within the society. And I think in some way, if you have a society where all the means of production are AIs, right, rather than humans, and all the labor is AI, then you can't rely on wages. You need some kind of redistribution. Now, there's still a question of whether this is like a stable equilibrium. Like, if humans if they're not producing things, like, do you still have political power? Like right now, like a lot of political power of humans comes from like the fact that like we can withhold, if people like revolt, the things necessary to supply the government just like stop happening. And the government itself is made up of humans who themselves can decide to disobey orders. Whereas, with AI, you can create a government that listens to only a single person, executes all orders flawlessly, and has no incentive to listen to the population because it produces everything for itself.
Do these expectations like affect any of your decisions or like the way you live your life? I think you mentioned once that you're like not saving for retirement because you are so confident that everything will like change drastically in the near future.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not like, so confident, but yeah, I don't at the moment save for retirement. I still have savings, but not specifically for retirement, because at the moment I do see, it does seem unlikely to me that 50 years from now we're living in a substantially similar world. that we could really hold back AI progress for that long. This could be both for bad or for good. It could be that like we figure out all the issues and we're living in like post-scarcity, like great society, and then utopia, yeah. But in which case, you wouldn't need to save for retirement because everything would be taken care of, or it doesn't matter because we're all dead. But yeah, I mean, I think for the most part, I think it has made me focus a bit more on making sure that I'm really spending my life in the way that I would want to be spending it. I think it's like really easy when you think you have like unlimited time left to just like kind of go through the motions and just kind of inertia your way through life. And I think I have really been forced to say like, okay, if potentially there are a few years left of society looking relatively normal, I mean, hopefully we have much longer than that, but if we only have that long, what is it that I want to spend the last few years of my life doing? And yeah, but it's like, it has made me really think to myself, are you sure that like you want to be what I want to be doing is research in the place I'm doing it? Or do I want to go off and travel? Do I want to go and move and do policy work or what have you? And so yeah, I think it has like forced me to really think about that and make sure that I'm not just going through the motions, but actually deciding what to do with my life. Although ultimately, I think in the end, I just ended up doing what I was going to do in the first place. But
it's almost like religion, but for rational people. This whole like system of this like belief that ASI is coming soon and things are going to rapidly change, hopefully for the better.
Yeah, I mean, I do think there's like elements of like religion in it, in the sense of like, yeah, and the sort of cosmic proportion of the cosmic kind of scale of the consequences that like you might expect or something that we're only really used to with like religion. I guess it like it doesn't quite have a lot of the same sociological features as religion though. Like it's not very comforting or like community building, or like it's like like a lot of the like desirable reasons to like have it's like I don't think it's something you would like slide into out of like a kind of desire to have community or see order in the world, or like any of the ways you might slide into ordinary religion. It seems like it's beliefs that I would rather not have or something.
Well, the parallel I was thinking of was like, like religious people think that they're going to go to heaven and everything's going to be like perfect and beautiful within their existence, and like this has similar implications, assuming that things go correctly.
Yeah, I mean, I do think it. I mean, I do think that is like 100% true, and this idea of people in Silicon Valley trying to build God. I mean, if you're an atheist and you don't believe that that God is real and that there's no sense of justice in the universe, well, you can make one. And well, yeah, I don't know. It is quite crazy to me that we're like seriously thinking about like these scenarios that seem like biblical proverbs or something.
Yeah.
About like the folly of hubris or something, and like
this brings me to a potentially wacky idea that I had. Do you know that Bostrom paper the one about simulations, where he says like one of the following three things must be true? Either one, the human species is very likely to go extinct before reaching a post-human stage. At least one of the following has to be true. So that was one. And then two, any post-human civilization is extremely unlikely to run a significant number of simulations of their evolutionary history. And 3, we are almost certainly living in a computer simulation. So I was thinking you could make kind of like an anthropic, like an anthropic addition to that, where like that could explain like why we're in this moment, because it seems so like outlandish that, you know, we're alive like now during what will probably be some sort of like singularity, as opposed to living like in all of the tens of thousands of years of previous human history.
Yeah.
And so like you could, like this is the time that an advanced civilization would have a large interest in simulating.
Yeah, no, I mean, well, I think there's definitely like some anthropics to consider here. Like, for instance, you know, if you expect the human population to continue growing exponentially, although it does seem to be like that it would on its current trajectory peak in some number of years, but like if you assume that like that the human population sort of like continues growing and like, you know, eventually spreads throughout the galaxy and we're like everywhere, and you imagine that your existence is like randomly sampled from the existence of all humans to have ever lived or something, it seems it seems quite strange to find yourself when humans are on a single planet rather than, you know, quadrillions of them across the galaxy or something. So maybe that suggests that there won't be quadrillions of humans across the galaxy or something. The simulation bit, I have like complex feelings about the simulation hypothesis or something, because under our current understanding of like physics and computation, like I don't really see how it's possible to build it. There is no way that I know of in our current universe that you could build a simulation that is faithful enough about like what I observe of reality. That's faithful enough while still being like simulatable in something that's like less than the size of the observable universe or something. Like simulating the universe within the universe is like really hard. And so it seems possible that like we could be simulated by a universe with like even higher, like with different physics and even more computational power or something. So this is actually like a simplified version of their physics or something. But then it's like kind of weird to think about, because then it's not really like future humans simulating us. It's like some weird alien beings or something that like simulated some version of us in some reduced universe or something. I don't know. It becomes hard to think about, like the Bostrom's sort of original argument about, well, humans are going to eventually want to simulate themselves or something. Like, what if there is something simulating us? I think it's quite unlikely to be something that seems like humans or something like that.
Yeah, well, I think that's pretty much it for my questions. Yeah, things have come a long way since I think I remember you showed me and I think Johnny the like Chat GPT-2 or GPT-2. I think during COVID, like 2020 or something, and yeah, it was like pretty interesting and like impressive then. But now it's, you know, like much crazier than many people would have ever imagined. So.
Yeah, I remember reading. There was a series of like Wait But Why, I think, put out a series on like super intelligence, and it had to be like 2014 or 2015 that I read. And from then on, I was like, I had the feeling that this would be a big deal, but it was like a very like abstract thing, and I didn't get into AI until years later. But
it's becoming a lot less abstract.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, let's hope for the best. Thanks for coming on and sharing all your knowledge with us. Hopefully, AI safety goes well.
Yeah, I hope so too.